Welcome back, Saridab here. Today we're going to play some Super Mario Bros. 2. So we've done Lost Levels, we did Mario Bros, we did Super Mario Bros. 3, so the only one left to try, to practice, is Super Mario Bros. 2. You might notice that the color balance is really nice today, compared to our usual fare, and that's because in my hour of need, the Arcade Vaults have loaned to me an HDMI converter, which is nicer than my usual one. And the reason I needed that is, if you remember, so when we played Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, whenever we got to 8-3, everything went purple for some reason. That also happened for Super Mario Bros. 2, but it happened right on the very first screen. So we fixed that problem now by swapping out my HDMI converter for a slightly better one. So thanks very much for that. Let's get to it. Let's give it a go. So this one's a little bit more involved than our usual fare because obviously we've got a character select screen here. And in theory, I think Toad's faster than the rest, but his jump's not very good. So just for insurance, and because we can make a couple of jumps that we can't make with other characters, we're going to be playing as Peach for an awful lot of the run. There is one world that Luigi is really good for, so we're going to be playing as Luigi for that, obviously. But for the majority, it's going to be Peach. So let's jump straight in. We haven't gone completely purple yet, so that's good. Let's hope the rest of the run goes just as well. So yeah, this is Super Mario Bros. 2. It's a little bit of a different direction compared to the other games in the compilation, because it's actually an adaptation, isn't it, of Doki Doki Panic, which was a completely different game in Japan. Like, obviously, it had none of the Mario branding, but they brought it over here, and they reskinned it, updated it. Oops, there we go, that's good. And just made the whole thing more Mario. So that was us taking a bit of a shortcut to get to the boss. The boss for most levels is going to be Birdo. Every now and again we're going to have to face something a little bit more threatening, but for the most part we're just throwing eggs at Birdo. So yeah, as you can see, we can't kill enemies by stomping on them, yeah, we've got to kill enemies by throwing them instead, or throwing things at them. Which, I guess, yeah, it's a little bit unusual, and it just adds something a little bit unique, a little bit different. It plays a little bit slower. I thought I could jump right at the end of that there. So we got a plan B, which is we're going to use that Ninja instead. But yeah, it breaks up the other Mario titles, to be honest. It's refreshingly different. And normally when we're playing all four, we play this one third. So we start with Lost Levels, then we play Super Mario Bros. Then we break things up and we play this, and then we finish off with Super Mario Bros. 3. So you'll get to see from here, the warp zones in this are a little bit different. The idea of warp zones is the same, it's just obviously it's a way to get from an earlier world to a much later world. In this case, we've got these potions, and when you enter the doors that are created by them, you end up in sort of like this mirror universe, the mirror world. And there are these vases, and some of them you can travel down. Use them as warp zones, so that was a warp zone to World 4. So yeah, it's a little bit more cryptic than the usual way that you would encounter warp zones in a Mario game. but also not drastically different. Like, if you think of the vases as tunnels, then sort of as pipes, then the way that you access them isn't... yeah, it's not completely different to the usual way you would access a warp zone. This level's a little bit different in that instead of Birdo at the end, we've just got this barrage of enemies. Whoops. And Shy Guy's piloting Autobots, which I guess is pretty cool. I'm pretty sure they're called Autobots. I'm aware that's the same as the Transformers, but I think, yeah, I do think that's what they're called. I don't think I've made that up. So we're not going to spend very long in World 2 in this ice world, because we've got another warp zone coming up. This is a bit of a gauntlet in and of itself here, with all these pixies. It's really horrible. I hate this section. Didn't go too badly, all things considered. Managed to avoid death, which obviously is always a good thing. Yeah, so we've got... Whoop. So you can use these as platforms, but they'll also damage you if you run into them from the side. So I guess, yeah, they just work how the typical enemies work, thinking about it. The only difference between those spouts and regular enemies is that obviously you can't throw the water spouts. But apart from that, they behave the same way. So this is World 6, and we're not going to spend much time in here at all. This is where playing on the All-Stars version diverges from playing on the usual version, because Super Mario All-Stars has got a menu system, which means that you can go back to any earlier world. So from World 6, we can go back to World 5, for example. And World 5 has got exactly the warp zone we need to get to World 7. So, yeah, it's a little bit sneaky. It's thinking outside the box a little bit. But that's quite interesting. So we go from World 1 to World 4. We go from World 4 to... Whoops. Oh, there we go, got caught in the wall. 1 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. Then we jump back to here. Sorry, 4 to 6. Then we jump back to here. And then finally on to 7. Which is completely the wrong order. But just happens to be the fastest way through the game. So you can see Luigi's got some tricks up his sleeve. He hasn't got as much jump control as Peach does, but he can jump further. Which means he's really good for that first level of this world. As you saw, sort of running through the cave there, jumping, I got to completely avoid the fish and the logs that were falling from the waterfall. Didn't really have to consider them at all. And he's pretty good for jumping across the first part of this level as well. There's a trick that you can use when you're climbing Ivy, which is on the very last frame, as you fall off Ivy, or vines I think as well, you can jump. And if you can do that consistently, you can save yourself a lot of time, because jumping is faster than climbing. But I can't do it consistently, I struggle to. Something that'll come back, something that will come with more practice maybe. Surprise, surprise, Birdo is the boss of this level. What's nice about this Birdo is that we can keep throwing the fish at her, because it respawns whenever we move off screen. Which means we don't have to worry about trying to use Luigi's awkward jump to land on eggs. Whoops, unless we do that. That's fine. We're right by the finish anyway. And 5-3, where we've got Luigi's last great trick. So there are these flying enemies that you're supposed to use to get up to this jar, but that takes time, so we're just going to jump straight up there instead. Only Luigi can do that, none of the other characters can. And Luigi can only just do it because he gets caught on the pixels in the top corner. So it's quite easy to fail that. It used to take me about 3 attempts on average, but I've managed to cut that down. And another thing that's unusual about this game is that rather than the sort of the typical 8 worlds, we've just got 7. And the 7th world is cut short as well. There's only 2 levels. Though I say cut short, the second level, 7-2, is a really long level compared to the others. I'm going to make sure that I defeat both of those so that this guy doesn't fail to spawn, because I can use him to bypass most of that and climb this ladder. I think that's a PAL exclusive trick. I don't think Peach's jump can get quite that far on NTSC, so you've got to go round. So, if that's true, that's one of the few cases where it's advantageous to play on PAL over playing NTSC. Which is nice. It's nice that we've got a couple of those. We haven't got many of those, but we've got a couple. There we go, that'll do. And now on to the final level. So, this level is the Great Big Fortress. So we enter here. It's supposed to be a bit of a maze. We're going to cut the maze short a little bit, using a trick where we can basically end up out of bounds, and that's going to save us a little bit of time. So this level is so big that a lot of the interiors are connected, even though visibly they don't appear to be. And though I could climb up this line and this chain and get to the next part of the level, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to try the trick where you jump at the last on the last frame. That's going to bypass the animation where I go from one screen to the next, and I'm now just running across the top of the level. Which means I can skip ahead to this section, which is right near the end of the fortress. And there we go. So we've gone to the first boss. So it appears that this bristle here is completely unguarded, which is quite unusual. But it turns out that this Hawkmouth is an enemy. Sort of, a little bit shocking, subverts your expectation a little bit. I imagine if you didn't know, you'd go to enter and then take damage and maybe die, which seems a little bit unfair. This is Wart. He takes 6 hits to defeat. We've got this vegetable machine in the middle for some reason, and he's allergic to vegetables. So if we throw vegetables at him while his mouth is open, he's going to take damage. What makes this tricky is if the vegetables come into contact with the bubbles that he's using as projectiles, then they just disintegrate. And we can't damage him unless his mouth is open. And he doesn't open his mouth unless he's planning on throwing bubbles. So it's you just got to be careful with the trajectory. And sometimes you've just got to get lucky. You get a feel for the timing, although it's semi-random. You can just get a feel for when he's going to open his mouth. Like then, I knew he was going to open his mouth then. That was actually a really good warp battle. So then we enter through this door, and when we enter through this door, we're able to reset the console and move on to the next game. But I'm not going to do that right now. We're going to watch the credits instead. Quite happy with that. That was Super Mario Bros. 2. That went really well. Yeah. Good stuff. So you can see there's a few different tricks we use. There's the menu backtracking, so that we can use the maximum number of warp zones to get to the finish. There's the swapping between characters, so that we've got use of the best jumps at the best times, usually Peach and Luigi. And we've got the ladder skip at the end of 7-2, where we jump onto the ceiling and we run across the top of the level, instead of navigating through the fortress the intended way, which would take a lot more time. But lo and behold, it was all a dream. None of it happened. It always feels like a little bit of a cop-out. And then you wonder to yourself, well, this was the debut of Shy Guys, so how come they turned up later in the Mario games? Maybe they existed anyway, and that's why Mario was dreaming about Shy Guys. They just happened to never turn up in Super Mario Bros. In the original Super Mario Bros. Just by coincidence. So we've got our cast list. Not much to say about this. I think there's a couple of mistakes in here. Localization mistakes, I guess. Most of these enemies we actually got to see, because we don't. Well, we do get to skip a fair bit of Super Mario Bros. 2, but you end up going through so many different worlds anyway that you do see the majority of the enemies. Like you even come across Phanto in 7-2 when you're taking the key across. Did we see any sparks? I don't think we did. Maybe we didn't come across any Pokies either. Okay, so Birdo and Ostro, you can see they're mislabeled there. Birdo is the boss that we were fighting, not Ostro. Oh, it's Autobomb. That's disappointing. I thought they were Autobots. I think I prefer them to be Autobots. You got Claw Glip there, who I assume was supposed to be called Claw Grip. And Wart, who's probably the most difficult boss across the entire 4 games. No, he's definitely the most difficult boss across the entire 4 games. There you go. That was Super Mario Bros. 2. Thanks for watching. I'll play that back, and I'll catch you in a little bit. Bye.